Before the land decides your fate, it usually sends a warning. Sometimes that warning wears the faces of children, and sometimes stopping to listen changes everything. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Richard had been moving west for 3 days without stopping longer than it took to water his horse and check his gear. Stopping too long invited questions, and questions led to attachments. Attachments had a way of costing more than they ever gave back. His purpose was narrow and clean. He carried supplies between 2 trading posts that preferred not to deal with towns, not to be known and not to owe favors. He was paid to move quietly, arrive on time, and leave without stories following him. That kind of work suited him. The afternoon light was sharp and unforgiving, bleaching color from the land near Cottonwood Flats. Richard kept his eyes forward, already measuring how far he could push before dusk made the trail less honest. His shoulders were tight, not from the ride, but from the constant, low tension earned over years of learning that danger rarely announced itself. He had chosen to be alone. Men who stayed that way long enough learned to hear what others missed, and to trust the weight of their own decisions without asking permission. He noticed the movement before his mind gave it meaning. Something shifted near the brush ahead, too deliberate to be wind, too controlled to be an animal. His hand drifted closer to the reins and his posture adjusted, without conscious thought. Habits shaped by loss and narrow escapes he did not revisit unless forced. His heart rate lifted not into panic but readiness. When the figures stepped into view, confusion came first, then a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with fear. 2 children stood in the open, small and still, positioned where the trail widened as if the spot had been chosen with care. They were Apache girls, twins by the mirror of their faces, around 8 years old, thin but not fragile. Their clothing was worn down to usefulness rather than dignity. Richard slowed his horse and stopped, remaining mounted as his eyes swept past them first, checking the tree line, the shallow draw, the open ground behind. No riders, no voices. That absence troubled him more than an ambush would have. Children didn't stand like this unless they'd learned not to run. The girls didn't step back when his horse shifted or when leather creaked under his weight. One of them had washed her face. The other had washed her hands. The detail lodged in his mind and stayed there. Someone had taught them what mattered. He spoke carefully, choosing a tone that wouldn't frighten them or invite challenge. "Where are your people?" The girl on the left pointed toward the low hills, her arm steady, finger straight. The other remained silent, her eyes fixed on the rifle strapped to his saddle, not with fascination but assessment. "Our home is there," the first girl said. Her English was clean, practiced. She didn't add please. She didn't explain why they were here. She stated a fact and waited. Irritation flared briefly, not at the girls, but at the situation pressing itself into his path. He hadn't planned to be involved in anything, requiring judgment beyond whether to push on or make camp. Still, he dismounted slowly, letting them see every movement, aware that sudden actions carried weight when fear lived close. His boots hit the dirt with a solid finality. He studied them again, noticing details that settled heavy in his stomach. Uneven braids tied with mismatched cloth, shallow scrapes on their knees, the way neither looked to the other for permission before speaking. These weren't children waiting to be rescued. They were children managing a problem. Riding away would be easy. Following them would not. But leaving 2 girls alone in this stretch of land meant carrying that knowledge forward. And Richard had learned some things followed you whether you wanted them to or not. "Lead," he said. They turned immediately, as if the outcome had already been decided. They walked ahead with measured steps, neither hurrying nor hesitating, and Richard followed at a careful distance, eyes tracking ground and brush, angles of approach. His mind ran through possibilities, a trap, a misunderstanding, a camp he didn't belong near. Alongside those thoughts pressed another quieter one he tried to ignore. Someone had taught these girls to trust action over words. The camp revealed itself slowly, as they crested a shallow rise. Small, restrained, intentionally plain. Low shelters pressed close to the earth. A fire kept tight and controlled. Tools laid out with purpose. Nothing decorative, Nothing wasted. This was a place built to avoid attention and endure pressure. A woman rose from beside the fire when they approached. Early 30s, maybe. Her posture was straight, movements economical. Her face carried the marks of responsibility more than age. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't smile. She acknowledged Richard with a single nod and returned to the pot in her hands, fixing something that wasn't broken. The girl stepped to her sides, close enough to touch her arms. The shape of the situation settled into place. This was their mother, a widow, though no one said it. A woman holding a fragile perimeter together with routine and restraint. Richard stopped several steps away and removed his hat, not as politeness, but because covering his eyes felt wrong here. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't explain why he was there. He waited. She didn't speak either. The silence filled with calculation. She weighed whether he brought danger or time. He weighed whether staying would cost more than leaving. Empathy pressed against caution inside his chest, and he didn't like it. It complicated clean decisions, but the girls had stepped onto his trail because they believed he might change something. As the fire cracked softly and the wind moved through the cottonwoods, Richard understood his original mission no longer mattered the same way. The road had broken its pattern. Whatever came next wouldn't be accidental. He didn't step into the camp as the light shifted toward evening. Crossing that invisible line without invitation felt like claiming space he hadn't earned. Instead, he stayed near his horse and loosened the cinch slowly, body angled so he could see both the shelters and the open ground beyond. The air cooled fast, carrying the dry scent of earth and old leaves. He told himself he'd only rest long enough to water the horse and let it breathe. Anything more would turn into involvement. And involvement was the one thing his work had trained him to avoid. But the camp behind him didn't feel like a place surviving on luck alone. That made leaving harder than he expected. The twins moved with purpose as daylight faded. One collected thin branches sorted by size. The other adjusted stones around the fire so heat stayed contained. They spoke rarely, and when they did, it was sharp and practical. Words used only when silence slowed things down. Richard watched without making it obvious. Neither child wasted motion. Both checked the tree line every few minutes, as if danger ran on a schedule they'd learned by heart. Nalin focused on preparation. She rinsed roots, set a pot near the fire, adjusted the wood until the flame settled into something steady. Her shoulders stayed set, her expression neutral, but Richard felt the tension beneath it. Hosting a stranger without knowing his weight or limits carried its own cost. As the sky darkened, Richard checked the perimeter without announcing it. He walked a slow arc around the camp, reading faint marks that told him people had passed near before and would likely pass again. The knowledge pressed into him quietly. If he left now, he'd be leaving more than a place. When he returned, one of the twins approached, holding a shallow wooden bowl filled with water, warmed just enough to take the edge off the cold. She didn't offer it like a gift. She set it on a flat stone near his boots and looked up as if the matter were settled. Drink. He hesitated a fraction of a second, aware that accepting meant something here, then crouched and drank slowly so they could see he didn't waste it. The girl watched his throat move, nodded once and stepped back. Her sister studied his face as if memorizing it. "You stay outside," the second said, not asking. "For now," Richard replied and meant it. As darkness settled, Nalin finally spoke without turning. "You're not from nearby." "No." "You're not a soldier." "No." She paused. "You can leave before morning." The warning beneath the permission was clear. "I could," he said. She glanced at him briefly in the firelight, then turned back. The twins finished eating and lingered near Richard instead of retreating. He rolled out his bedroll near his horse, set his rifle within reach, angled so it didn't threaten but remained unmistakable. He took the first watch without being asked. He told himself he stayed because the land was wrong, because children shouldn't learn help always passes them by. But beneath that was a quieter truth. For the first time in a long while, leaving felt heavier than staying. The camp settled into uneasy sleep as the night deepened, and Richard kept his eyes on the dark, already knowing this road had changed him. Morning rose slowly over the cottonwoods, pale light stretching across the quiet camp. Richard stood at the edge of the fire pit, watching the twins work without being told, their movements sure and practiced. The land was still dangerous, that much hadn't changed. But something else had. Nalin stepped beside him, her presence steady, unforced. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't need to. The girls had already done that in their own way, stepping into his path days ago, trusting a stranger when they had no other choice. Richard looked toward the trail he was supposed to take, the road that had always waited for him. For the first time, it didn't call. He knelt and adjusted a loose stone at the fire's edge, then rose, meeting Nalin's eyes. "I'll stay a while," he said, simple and honest. No promises beyond what he could carry. Nalin nodded once, accepting the truth of it. The twins exchanged a glance, relief flickering through their careful expressions, before they turned back to their work. The camp settled into its rhythm again, quieter, stronger. Richard understood then that the road hadn't taken something from him. It had delivered him where he was needed, and for once that was enough.